Imagine waking up one morning, just making your coffee, looking out your window at the exact same farm, the same streets, the same neighbors you've known your entire life. Only today, everything has completely changed.
Yeah, you're suddenly told you live in a different country.
Exactly. You're suddenly informed that your home, your land, and your very identity have been abruptly reassigned to a brand new country. And the person who decided this, just some man sitting in a guarded mansion thousands of miles away, who had literally never once set eyes on your homeland.
It's a terrifying thought, honestly.
It really is. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are taking you straight into the humid, chaotic summer of 1947. We are looking at the drawing of the borders between India and Pakistan.
Which is, it's arguably one of the most consequential map-making exercises in modern history. We're looking at the partition of the British Indian Empire, specifically focusing on how those boundary lines were drawn in the provinces of Punjab and Bengal. And our stack of sources today is pretty extensive. We're pulling from, historical analyses, the official text of the Radcliffe Award itself, geopolitical journals, and even a really famous poem by W.H. Auden that just perfectly captures the surreal absurdity of the moment.
Yeah, the sheer scale of the mission is it's hard to wrap your head around. I mean, we are talking about dividing 450,000 square kilometers of territory. We are talking about determining the national fates of 88 million people.
It's a staggering number.
Right. Just to give you a sense of what that means, imagine the entire modern-day population of Germany suddenly having to, pack a single suitcase, leave everything they own, and walk across a newly drawn border.
Just massive, massive upheaval.
And the kicker here. The British gave the architect of this border exactly 5 weeks to do it.
Yeah, just 5 weeks. So our goal today is to understand how this monumental task was handled in such an impossibly short time frame, and why the man chosen to hold the pen was selected specifically because he was completely ignorant of the region.
Okay, let's unpack this right away, because the choice of architect is baffling. The man we are talking about is Sir Cyril Radcliffe. He was a highly respected English lawyer, sure. But according to our sources, before July 1947, Radcliffe had never traveled east of Paris.
Not even a little bit.
Right. He had zero background in cartography, zero experience in Indian administration, and zero understanding of the cultural complexities of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. To put this in perspective for you, it's like asking a referee who has never seen football to not only officiate the Super Bowl, but to, simultaneously rewrite the rule book, divide the stadium in half, and decide which fans get to keep their seats.
Oh, and all while the stadium is literally on fire.
Exactly.
That is a very apt way to describe it, because the stadium was indeed on fire. But what's fascinating here is the underlying British colonial logic driving that decision. You see, Lord Mountbatten, who was the last viceroy of India, firmly believed that Radcliffe's complete lack of experience was actually his greatest asset.
Wait, his greatest asset?
Yeah. He viewed it as a guarantee of unbiased neutrality.
But surely there were other ways to get a neutral party, right? You don't have to hire someone who's completely blind to the reality on the ground.
Well, there were other options on the table. For instance, there was a proposal to bring in the United Nations to draw the borders.
Okay, that makes more sense.
Right, but Jawaharlal Nehru, representing the Indian National Congress, objected to that. He feared that UN involvement would introduce unacceptable bureaucratic delays.
Which, makes sense. Nobody wants a border drawn by a slow-moving committee when tensions are already boiling over. And Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was representing the Muslim League, had his own idea, right? He suggested bringing in 3 senior law lords from the United Kingdom to act as impartial boundary commissioners.
Exactly, but that was rejected too. And the rationale was almost comical. It was believed these elderly British judges couldn't survive the sweltering heat of an Indian summer. So it fell to Radcliffe. But we have to look at the broader context, the real why behind this. Why did Mountbatten need someone like Radcliffe? The British Empire had just survived World War II. They were essentially bankrupt. They were rationing bread back in London.
Right, they had no money left.
Exactly. They simply could not afford to manage a descending civil war in India. They had a really strong desire to save face and manage their own imperial exit quickly without looking like they required outside help from the UN to dismantle their own empire.
Just think about the ultimate irony of that for a second. Put yourself in the shoes of someone living in Punjab or Bengal in 1947. The person holding the pen, the single individual determining your national destiny, your citizenship, your safety, is the one person in the room who doesn't know anything about your culture, your geography, or your history.
It's tragic, and that lack of knowledge might have been manageable, or at least, mitigated if he had been given enough time to study, to consult experts, to travel the land.
He wasn't.
No, time was the one resource the British absolutely refused to give him. Mountbatten gave Radcliffe 5 weeks, 35 days to cleave a subcontinent in two.
Our sources actually mention an interview Radcliffe gave decades later, in the 1970s, to the veteran journalist Kulit Nayar. Radcliffe casually admitted, just sipping his English tea, that if he had 2 to 3 years, he might have improved on what he did.
2 to 3 years.
Right. But I have to push back here. I get that he didn't have 3 years. Wait, couldn't they just go out and look at the land they were dividing, like get in a plane, fly over the borderlands, or send deputies out in jeeps to talk to the locals?
It's a really logical question, but we have to look at the reality of 1947. First, consider the aviation technology. You're talking about small, unpressurized aircraft flying over unfamiliar terrain with no modern radar.
Oh, that's true.
And more importantly, it was July. This is the height of the monsoon season. The weather was incredibly turbulent, making aerial surveys over vast, flat plains largely useless for identifying complex local demographics.
What about on the ground?
On the ground, the heat in the plains of India and Pakistan was well over 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Radcliffe himself was actually struck down by a severe bout of dysentery almost immediately upon arriving.
Okay, so he's physically sick, but what about sending his staff?
Well, the political temperature was just as dangerous as the weather. The breakdown of law and order had already begun. Riots were erupting in the streets. It simply wasn't safe for a British boundary architect or his deputies to casually survey contested villages.
So he was effectively trapped indoors.
Exactly. He was shut away in a heavily guarded, isolated estate in Delhi. And because he couldn't do field surveys, he was forced to rely on blunt, highly flawed tools. He had to use maps that were wildly out of date and demographic data from the 1941 census.
Wait, the craziest part of the 1941 census data isn't even that it was 6 years old. Our sources point out it was widely acknowledged to be deliberately manipulated.
Precisely. You have to understand how a census in colonial India worked and why it was skewed. By 1941, it was obvious to everyone that independence was coming, right?
Right. The writing was on the wall.
And that political power would likely be distributed based on religious demographics. So different communities systematically inflated their numbers.
Oh.
Yeah, local officials would register temporary guests as permanent residents, or they'd alter village boundaries in the ledgers to boost the headcount of their own religious group. So Radcliffe is sitting in a sweltering room, sick with dysentery, drawing lines based on manipulated data.
Here's where it gets really interesting and, well, horrifying from a purely mechanical standpoint. Because he is using outdated small-scale maps, the physical act of drawing the line becomes a complete disaster.
Yeah, the pencil issue.
Right. The sources note that Radcliffe was drawing with a thick pencil. On the scale of the maps he was using, the mere width of his pencil stroke equated to 2 or 3 miles on the ground.
Yes. When your pencil tip covers 3 miles of territory, you aren't drawing a border, you are dropping a scythe. You are inadvertently assigning dozens of villages to one country or the other just based on the angle you hold your hand.
It sounds like dark fiction. In fact, W.H. Auden, the famous poet, wrote a poem in 1966 called Partition that captures this nightmare perfectly. He writes, "Shut up in a lonely mansion, with police night and day patrolling the gardens to keep assassins away. He got down to work, to the task of settling the fate of millions. The maps at his disposal were out of date."
Yeah, the terrible maps.
Exactly, and then it goes on. And the census returns almost certainly incorrect. But there was no time to check them, no time to inspect contested areas. The weather was frightfully hot, and a bout of dysentery kept him constantly on the trot.
It just paints such a vivid, almost pitiful picture of a man entirely out of his depth, yet wielding godlike power.
Really does.
And to be fair to the original plan, Radcliffe wasn't actually supposed to be doing this in a vacuum. His ignorance was supposed to be balanced by local expertise.
Right, the commissions.
Yeah, he was appointed chairman of 2 boundary commissions, one for Punjab and one for Bengal. Each commission had 4 local high court judges, 2 nominated by the Indian National Congress and 2 nominated by the Muslim League. They were supposed to be his eyes and ears. They were supposed to be the safety net.
But that safety net completely collapsed.
Almost instantly. The commissions were designed with equal representation to be perfectly fair. But in the highly charged atmosphere of 1947, Equal representation just meant a perfect 2-2 tie on every single issue. They immediately and totally deadlocked.
Because both sides were fighting for their very survival. I mean, let's look at what they were actually arguing over. In Bengal, for instance, you had the massive prize of Calcutta.
Calcutta is a perfect example of why the deadlock was inevitable. The Muslim League desperately wanted Calcutta because it was the industrial and economic heart of the region.
It was a massive hub.
Exactly. It had the jute mills, the factories, the major international port. They argued that without Calcutta's economic engine, East Bengal would be economically stranded, literally a rural slum, as one British official called it.
But the Indian National Congress was equally determined to retain it for India, right? Pointing out that the actual population within the city limits of Calcutta was majority Hindu. You have economic necessity colliding head-on with demographic reality.
Right. And then you have Punjab, which was even more complicated because of the Sikhs. The Muslim League is pushing for boundaries that encompass contiguous Muslim majority areas. The Congress is pushing back to secure strategic assets. But the Sikhs are caught in this devastating geographic trap.
The Sikh dilemma is one of the greatest tragedies of the partition, isn't it?
Absolutely. To understand why, you have to look at the land. The Sikhs had spent generations turning the Punjab into the breadbasket of India. They developed incredibly wealthy agricultural zones known as the canal colonies.
And their holy sites, too.
Right. They had their holiest shrines, like Nankana Sahib, scattered across the province. They demanded the partition of Punjab to avoid being entirely enveloped within a Muslim majority, Pakistan.
But the math just wasn't on their side.
Exactly. Demographics were completely against them. The Sikhs were roughly 20% of the Punjab population, but they were spread out. They did not form an absolute majority in any single district.
Wow, not a single one.
Not one. So no matter where you draw the line based on a simple majority, you are cutting the Sikh community in half, separating them from their land and their temples.
I read in our sources that Jinnah actually offered the Sikhs minority protections if they would agree to stay within Pakistan as a whole. Why didn't they take that deal?
Well, trust had completely broken down. The Sikh leadership felt those promises were just too vague. Historically and politically, they had more alignment with the Indian National Congress anyway. So feeling anxious and trapped, they threw their lot in with Congress.
Oh, they were terrified.
Oh, absolutely. Sikh leaders like Giani Kartar Singh explicitly warned the British that if their shrines and lands were not protected, they would be, in his words, obliged to fight. The tension was absolute. And because the 4 judges on the commission couldn't agree on a single village, the safety net vanished. The entire weight of the decision fell squarely back onto Radcliffe's shoulders.
But Radcliffe wasn't just told to count heads and draw a line, right? There was a massive loophole in his instructions.
Yes, and that loophole changed the course of South Asian history. The official mandate instructed the boundary commissions to demarcate the boundaries on the basis of contiguous Muslim and non-Muslim majority areas, but it added one crucial, incredibly vague phrase: in doing so, it will also take into account other factors.
Other factors. I mean, that could mean literally anything.
And it did. That undefined loophole allowed Radcliffe to shift his focus away from strictly human demographics and toward infrastructure and geopolitics.
I see.
Think about how difficult it is to divide a province that was built to function as a single integrated organism. The Punjab, for example, relied on a massive interconnected irrigation system.
Right. Our sources talk a lot about canal headworks being prioritized over people.
Exactly. Think of a canal headwork as the master valve for a massive water network. If you draw a border that gives the master valve to country A, but the farmland that relies on that water is in country B, country A can literally starve country B by just turning off the tap.
Which is terrifying.
It is. So Radcliffe found himself prioritizing who gets the canals, who gets the railway junctions, and how to create defensible geographic borders. A defensible border usually follows a natural feature like a river, rather than an invisible demographic line through a flat plain.
Which led to some absolutely absurd, heartbreaking outcomes on the ground. When you are rushing to draw a line in 5 weeks and your thick pencil is prioritizing a railway junction or a river, you aren't looking at village borders.
No, not at all.
Because of this other factors loophole and the sheer speed of the process, the Radcliffe Line literally ran straight through the middle of villages. It separated farmers from the fields they had plowed their entire lives.
Yeah, it was arbitrary.
In some extreme cases, the border went right through the middle of a single house. You could have your kitchen in India and your bedroom in Pakistan.
It highlights the ultimate failure of prioritizing administrative expedience over human reality. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, This reliance on other factors opened the door to intense behind-the-scenes political pressure. Because the mandate was so vague and Radcliffe's power was absolute, the final days of the demarcation process became highly secretive.
Which brings us to the ultimate historical controversy of the partition. I want to walk through the timeline of the famous Able sketch map, because this is where the geopolitical chess game really comes into focus.
This is a wild story.
It really is. Here is what our sources tell us. Evan Jenkins, the British governor of Punjab, was terrified of the impending violence. He urgently requested advance notice of the boundary line so he could position his troops and police to keep the peace.
Makes sense.
So on August 8th, Mountbatten's private secretary, a man named George Abel, sent Jenkins a sketch map based on information from the Boundary Commission. This map clearly showed the sub-districts or tehsils of Zira and Firozapur being awarded to Pakistan.
That is correct.
But the official award isn't published until August 17th, and when it is published, Zira and Firozapur have suddenly been shifted. They are awarded to India. Somewhere between August 8th and August 17th, the line moved. Why? What could possibly justify moving the line at the 11th hour?
Well, the sources present a compelling geopolitical theory that explains the why behind this shift. Zira and Firozapur weren't just random plots of land, they contained those vital canal headworks we just discussed.
Oh, the water valves.
Right. Furthermore, there was the issue of the Gurdaspur district, which also went to India despite having a Muslim majority. Gurdaspur was critical because it provided the only viable land access into the princely state of Kashmir.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Many historians and Pakistani officials at the time alleged that Lord Mountbatten personally intervened and pressured Radcliffe to alter the map to favor India.
So they are alleging that Mountbatten abandoned demographic logic for strategic colonial exit priorities. But why would the British care? They're leaving.
But they were thinking about the Cold War.
Really?
Yeah, the British military brass realized they were exiting South Asia, but they still needed at least one strong, stable successor state in the Commonwealth to help protect their strategic interests against the expanding Soviet Union.
So India was the bet.
Exactly. The theory goes that a larger, stronger India, with land access to the strategic buffer state of Kashmir, served broader British geopolitical interests far better than sticking strictly to religious demographics.
That is a staggering implication. Millions of lives disrupted so the British could position a chess piece against the Soviets.
It is staggering. However, as an impartial review of the sources, we must note that this theory is heavily contested. Mountbatten expressly and repeatedly denied ever interfering with Radcliffe's work or pressuring him to change the lines.
And Radcliffe.
Radcliffe himself maintained until his death that he made the changes entirely on his own, upon further reflection of the infrastructure needs and those other factors. But the existence of that August 8th sketch map ensures the controversy will never truly die.
It's just wild to think about. A pencil stroke moves a few inches on a map in Delhi, and hundreds of thousands of people suddenly find themselves on the wrong side of a border they didn't even know existed yet.
And that brings us to the tragic aftermath of the Radcliffe Line. When the lines were finally announced, the reality set in. Radcliffe was so horrified by the unprecedented violence and mass migration that erupted along the borders he drew that he reportedly burned all his notes, all his early drafts, and his maps.
He just destroyed everything.
Yeah. He left India on August 15th, the day of independence, and he refused to even collect his 40,000 rupee fee for the job. He never returned to India or Pakistan, telling his friends years later he was afraid he might get shot.
So what does this all mean for us today? The sources make one thing painfully clear. Any line drawn to partition the subcontinent in 1947 would have caused massive upheaval. The populations were just too intertwined, the history too deep.
Right, there was no perfect solution.
No, but when you look at the mechanisms of how it was done, a bankrupt empire desperate to leave, a draconian 5-week deadline, outdated maps, a thick pencil, and an architect completely isolated from the human reality of the land he was carving up chaos wasn't just likely. It was absolutely guaranteed.
It is a stark reminder of how administrative expedients can permanently shatter lives. It reduces complex human beings with rich histories and generational ties to their land into mere census statistics and collateral damage in a geopolitical exit strategy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final lingering question that comes directly from the timeline in our sources. We mentioned the official award was published on August 17th, but Radcliffe had actually finished and signed the final reports by August 12th and 13th.
Yes. Lord Mountbatten placed an absolute embargo on the Radcliffe Award.
Right.
He deliberately locked the maps in his safe and delayed their publication until 2 days after India and Pakistan officially became independent on August 15th.
Which raises an incredibly dark question for you to mull over. The British administration knew the boundary would unleash unprecedented violence. I mean, their own local governors and intelligence reports were flashing red.
Oh, absolutely.
So by embargoing the map until August 17th, was this 2-day delay a calculated political maneuver?
Yeah.
Did the British Empire deliberately wait until they were officially stripped of power, ensuring that when the inevitable bloodshed erupted, it would legally and technically be the problem of the newly independent nations?
It's a chilling thought.
Did they delay releasing the map just so they could wash their hands of the very chaos they had designed? Think about that the next time you look out your window at the place you call home.